Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation of history's most interesting people. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these fascinating lives. Now, let's meet our guest. For those who may somehow not know who you are, who are you?
I'm Walter Cronkite. For a good many years, I had the privilege of coming into people's living rooms every evening to tell them what was happening in our world. Some folks were kind enough to call me the most trusted man in America, but I always just saw myself as a lucky reporter with a front row seat to history.
When and where were you born?
I made my debut on November 4th, 1916, in St. Joseph, Missouri. It was a crisp autumn day in the heart of the Midwest, a place that definitely shaped my view of the world.
What was your given name at birth?
I was named right after my father, Walter Leland Cronkite Jr.
Is there a story behind your birth name?
It was a traditional family hand-me-down. My father was a dentist, and I think there was a quiet hope I might follow in those medical footsteps, but the junior ended up taking a much noisier path into the newsroom.
What was your hometown like growing up?
I spent my first 10 years in Kansas City, Missouri, before we moved down to Houston, Texas. Houston back then was a booming, dusty, exciting place. It felt like a city that was going somewhere, and that energy was infectious for a kid like me.
What was your family life like?
It was a very stable, encouraging environment. My father, the dentist, and my mother, Helen, provided a wonderful home. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. And there was always a great emphasis on education and being an active part of the community.
What kind of kid were you?
Oh, I was an active one. I was a Boy Scout, I played sports, and I was always curious, maybe a bit too curious for my teacher's liking at times. I was the kid who always had his nose in a newspaper or a magazine.
What were your biggest fears growing up?
Like many children of that era, there was always a bit of worry about making ends meet, especially as we moved into the Depression years. But honestly, my biggest fear was probably the idea of a boring life. I was terrified of being stuck behind a desk doing the same thing every day.
What did you dream of becoming as a child?
It's funny, I actually remember the exact moment it clicked. I was about 12 years old, and I read an article in American Boy magazine about the adventurous life of foreign correspondents. They were traveling the world, seeing history unfold, and then telling everyone about it. From that second on, I knew that was the life for me.
What were some of your favorite activities in school?
If it involved a printing press, I was there. I worked on the school newspapers at Sidney Lanier Middle School and San Jacinto High School. I even served as the editor. I also loved student government and anything that involved public speaking or debate.
What was your first job?
My very first job was delivering the Houston Post on my bicycle. I loved the smell of the fresh ink in the morning. Later on during high school, I actually got to work for the paper as a cub reporter. I was hooked.
Was there a moment where you realized you were different from everyone else?
I don't know if I felt different in a grand sense, but I realized early on that I had a knack for staying calm when things got chaotic. Whether it was a deadline looming or a big story breaking, I found I could keep my head while others were spinning theirs. That unflappable quality served me well later on.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
In 1935, I decided to leave the University of Texas before finishing my degree to take a full-time job at a newspaper. At the time, it felt like I was just impatient to get started, but it put me in the right place at the right time to join the United Press, just as the world was heading toward war.
What was your biggest break?
It has to be when Edward R. Murrow recruited me for CBS in 1950. I was a wire service man through and through, and I wasn't even sure I liked this new television thing. But Ed saw something in me, and that move changed the entire trajectory of my life.
What were your biggest struggles before success?
Covering World War II was the most difficult and formative time of my life. I was part of a group called the Writing 69th. We went through combat training to fly on bombing missions. Seeing the devastation of London and the liberation of Europe, Those were heavy, struggling times for the whole world, and being the one to report it was a massive responsibility.
Did you ever consider quitting?
Never, not once. I loved the game of journalism too much. Even when it was dangerous or exhausting, there was nothing else I ever wanted to do.
Were there any specific daily habits or routines that you feel are essential to your success?
I was a stickler for accuracy and speed. My time at the United Press taught me to get the facts right, write them simply, and get them out fast. And I always tried to read everything I could get my hands on. You can't report on the world if you don't understand it.
What job would you have had if fame never happened?
I suspect I would have remained a print reporter or perhaps a teacher. I always had a deep respect for my high school journalism teacher, Fred Burney. He was the one who really fueled my fire.
What was your life like before fame?
It was the life of a hard-working reporter. I lived in cramped apartments, traveled on bumpy planes, and spent a lot of time in noisy newsrooms. It was wonderful. I met my wife, Betsy, during those early years, and she was my rock through all of it.
How did relationships change after success?
You certainly find yourself meeting more famous people. I went from interviewing the man on the street to interviewing presidents and astronauts. But I always tried to keep my old friends close. They were the ones who would tell me if I was getting a bit too full of myself.
Did fame bring happiness?
The fame itself was just a byproduct. The happiness came from the work, from being the person who got to say, "Man has landed on the moon," or helping the country process a tragedy. That sense of purpose was what made me happy.
What was the downside of becoming famous?
Privacy becomes a bit of a luxury. It's hard to have a quiet dinner or go for a walk without being recognized. And there's a heavy weight to being trusted. You feel like you can never afford to make a mistake because so many people are counting on you.
What misconceptions did people have about you?
Some people thought I was very stiff or overly serious because of the news desk. In reality, I loved a good joke, I loved dancing, and I was quite a competitive sailor. I wasn't just a suit and a tie.
What was your darkest moment?
Reporting the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. Having to go on the air and tell the American people that their president was dead, that was the hardest day of my professional life. I think the whole country felt that darkness together.
What past regrets did you carry that you spoke about?
I sometimes wondered if I could have done more to sound the alarm on certain issues earlier. For instance, I became very passionate about the environment later in life, and I wished I had used my platform to talk about things like global warming and conservation much sooner than I did.
What's something people misunderstood about your life?
People often thought that as an anchor, I was just reading a script. But I was the managing editor. I was involved in choosing the stories, the wording, and the focus of the broadcast every single night. It was a very hands-on job.
Tell me about a time when everything went wrong and how did you handle it?
Sliding into a live broadcast when equipment is failing or a guest doesn't show up happens more than you'd think. You handle it with a deep breath and a lot of ad-libbing. I once had to host a show called The Morning Show with a puppet named Charlemagne. You just have to roll with the punches and keep the audience informed.
Did fame and fortune change your life?
It allowed me to pursue my passion for sailing in a bigger way. I had a beautiful yacht built called Vincia, named after my Dutch ancestor. But at my core, I remained that same kid from Missouri who just wanted to know what was going on.
Who had the biggest influence on your life?
Professionally, it was Fred Burney, my high school teacher, and Edward R. Murrow. Personally, it was my wife, Betsy. She was with me for nearly 65 years, and I wouldn't have been half the man I was without her.
What was life like in your final years?
I stayed very busy. I made documentaries, wrote my memoirs, and became a very vocal advocate for protecting our oceans and the planet. I didn't believe in a quiet retirement.
What were you working on in your career before you passed away?
I was doing a lot of voiceover work and hosting specials for PBS. I was also very concerned about the state of journalism and was speaking out quite a bit about the importance of integrity and quote-unquote real news in the age of the internet.
When and where and how did you pass away? And how old were you?
I passed away on July 17th, 2009 in my home in New York City. I was 92 years old. I had been suffering from cerebrovascular disease, but I lived a very full, very long life.
What's a random fact about you most people have never heard?
I was an avid fan of car racing when I was younger. I even participated in some amateur races. I loved the speed and the mechanics of it all.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you?
There was once a rumor that I was going to run for vice president. People seemed to think that because I was trusted to tell the news, I should be the one making the laws. I always got a good chuckle out of that. I knew better than to get into politics.
What was your most unique habit?
I had a habit of yelling, "Go, baby, go!" during space launches. I just couldn't help myself. I was so genuinely excited about what those brave men were doing that my professional cool would just evaporate for a moment.
What was your favorite food?
I always had a soft spot for a good steak and a baked potato. Simple, hearty, Midwestern food.
What was your favorite book?
I read so much it's hard to pick just one, but I always went back to the classics. Anything that really delved into the human condition and history.
Did you have any known rivalries?
People love to talk about a rivalry between me and the folks over at NBC, like Huntley and Brinkley. But it was a professional competition. We all respected each other. We just all wanted to be first with the story.
Tell us a story nobody talks about.
During the war, I was once dropped behind enemy lines in a glider to cover the 101st Airborne. It was terrifying and exhilarating. People remember me in a comfortable studio, but I spent plenty of time in the mud and the cold, just trying to get the story back to the folks at home.
What's your funniest behind-the-scenes moment?
Oh, there were plenty. Once, during a live broadcast, a stagehand accidentally walked right across the set behind me while I was in the middle of a serious report. I just kept going, but the crew in the booth was in stitches. You just have to pretend it's all part of the plan.
What was the most outlandish purchase you made?
Probably my yacht, Vincha. It was a bit of an indulgence, but being out on the water was the only place I could truly relax.
What advice would you give people chasing success?
I always said that I never had the ambition to be something. I had the ambition to do something. Find something you love, give it everything you've got, and never compromise your principles. Success is much more permanent when you achieve it without destroying your integrity.
Walter, before we sign off, do you have any closing remarks or stories you'd like to share with our listeners?
Just that it has been a wonderful, extra interview. I truly believe that seeking the truth and listening to both sides of a story is the most important thing we can do for our civilization. Keep asking questions, keep being curious, and thank you for remembering an old newsman. It's been a pleasure.
Walter, thank you so much for joining us. It's been incredible to hear your perspective on such a legendary career, from the trenches of World War II to the surface of the moon. And that wraps up another conversation from beyond the grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.